Hello, this is Neal Lipschutz coming to you from Davos, Switzerland, the scene of the World Economic Forum annual meeting. Very pleased to be joined by Representative Patrick McHenry, a Republican of North Carolina, who is the chair of the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Oversight. Representative McHenry, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, and thanks for bringing a little snow.
Yes,
wow.
It's a little unusual for you to see snow, I would imagine, down in North Carolina.
Yes, and I'm freezing,
yes.
But it's a wonderful time here in Davos, wonderful policymakers and interesting discussions.
Yeah.
So it's worth it.
Yeah, it's a long trip, but worth it. I'd like to talk to you about something that's important back in the United States. It's the notion of economic growth and, more specifically, funding startups, funding small businesses. You were the author of the notion of trying to push a more liberal idea of crowdfunding, letting people invest small amounts in startups, became part of broader legislation. Can you take us through where that legislation stands and what needs to happen to see its full impact?
Well, how the legislation's written is it's up to the Securities and Exchange Commission, which we've empowered over the last 80 years to write regulations when it comes to our securities markets, or our public markets, and how companies go public. Well, this is such a new construct. We gave them additional time till the end of 2012 to write those regs. They still have not done it. There's been a lot of turnover within the commission. And I'm hopeful that with a new chair, Ms. White, starting hopefully through confirmation in the Senate, we'll be able to take this matter up and get things done. In the meantime, though, you have a 2-2 split, 4 members of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and my belief is that they can actually get some consensus about these regulations so we can see this money flow to small businesses and startups.
And there has been some objections to aspects of the bill saying that if you let people who are not used to early stage investment, or if you lower some of the investor protections or liberalize them, it's an invitation to perhaps greater fraud against individual investors. What's your response to that?
Well, investor protection is obviously of utmost importance and a focus of what Carolyn Maloney and I did in the House. And I worked with Congresswoman Maloney, a Democrat from Manhattan, to construct investor protections that were workable, reasonable, and yet affordable for these small equity raises. And so if you're raising $100,000, that regulatory burden of our public markets is such a high one. So we wanted to have some standardization for shareholder rights. We also wanted to have some standardization on disclosures in that whole process. And we got that. And but there is a great concern about how we take care of shareholders. But what I would also say is we have public markets. We have huge enforcement mechanisms. We have an SEC that has 3,000 individuals, hardworking individuals within it, and yet we still have fraud in our public markets. So we want to make sure that the crowd, the internet community that can participate in this, really has the final say on fraud prevention, that they can sniff out fraud and end it.
Right, and once the regulations are in place, what are your aspirations, what are your expectations for what this legislation can do for smaller companies and for startups?
Well, I think the sky's the limit, truly. Just as the internet has developed over the last 20 years into a really mature ecosystem around the world, I think crowdfunding will be utilized in ways that I can't even foresee, or we can't even foresee. And in a decade, I think we'll have a substantial and robust funding mechanism that will be that early stage investment for companies that can then graduate into a VC or venture, other venture capital rounds, or private offering, or going fully public. And I think we'll see some successes if these regulations are done well and correctly.
Last question, Representative. What other kinds of measures in the near term can Congress approve, debate, that would help get greater economic growth in the United States?
well, there's a lot. I mean, getting our fiscal house in order is of utmost concern. I've heard a lot of that feedback in the sessions I've been in here in Davos, but also went to a session yesterday about new funding models and the debate about this. We see a lot of social investing and impact investing, and that is a very, I think, new idea that's being injected into our public markets and for-profit companies, both on the investor side and on the corporation side. That is one mechanism, whether it's green tech, for instance, that they can actually come to the fore and hopefully answer a lot of the challenges that we're facing right now in terms of energy policy. That's one area that I think can come about in a stronger and better way.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Neal. Appreciate it.